Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of a new book presented to you by the Arab American Center for Culture and Arts. The beach was no longer only a site of leisure and recreation, but a space for inventing a reality adjacent to that of war. This new reality, however, came at a great price. How many times did we have to pack and rush home when the situation suddenly deteriorated? How many times did we endure the sounds of explosions, pretending they were too far away? Though we put on new skins and masks of courage, we were exposed, naked in our vulnerability, desperate to be together. So we played and gossiped and flirted in the sun. With these words and more like them, Dr. Tarek Al-Aris takes us in this journey of water on fire, a memoir of war. Dr. Tarek Al-Aris is a distinguished scholar and author known for his contributions to Middle Eastern literature and cultural studies. He currently holds the position of professor and chair of the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at Dartmouth College. He has a profound interest in modern Arabic literature, digital culture, and the intersections of media and politics in the Arab world. In his latest work, Water on Fire, a Memoir of War, he provides a deeply personal and evocative account of his experiences during the Lebanese Civil War. This memoir intricately weaves his memories of growing up in a war-torn country with broader reflections on the impact of conflict on identity, culture, and the human spirit. Through vivid storytelling and insights, Al-Aris captures the harrowing realities of war while also exploring themes of resilience, hope, and the quest for peace. Water on Fire stands as a significant contribution to contemporary memoirs, offering readers a unique lens into the lived experiences of those affected by the Lebanese Civil War and the enduring consequences on their lives and societies. Of course, this book and topic is close to heart to ourselves, to many Lebanese Americans, and to many Lebanese expats, and to many Lebanese, period. And also to many Arabs who have similar experiences and a shared historical memory. This book is also resonated with me very strongly. I feel that although we have this common experience, when you meet a Lebanese, you always feel that as if we have read these unwritten novels together, all of us. We have this common shared experience, emotions, and trauma. But it was never expressed. I have never seen it expressed, especially in a way that merges modern literature into its weaving. I was really amazed to see it for the first time being done and dissected in front of my eyes. This is a retroactive memoir of our feelings and emotions, on how they are manifested or merged in the subjects of our memory. Dr. Al-Aris, he takes the objects that we've experienced and we memorize, and they are part of our memory, and they are merged with our emotions and feelings of that time, and they are merged also with the political situation and the narrative and the cultural and intellectual narrative of the time. Uh, Something that we've felt but never been able to put in words, a representation of a very complicated human experience. The Lebanese of the late 20th century, I mean, Lebanese without any war is a torn person, torn by definition. The definition of the Lebanese identity itself is one that immediately tears you apart into fighting sides and conflicting perspectives. So imagine adding to that a civil war and a hand of each regional conflict that had to play in the Lebanese experience. Um, and then, more than that, we were torn in our immigration, in our exile, in our abandonment, in our yearning that is never satisfied, and in our homelessness that seems to be eternal and existential. There is really no words for me to describe this journey except reading the book. I felt it's part of it is my memoir, and I feel it can be a memoir of every Lebanese who experienced the civil war, or his parents did, or he lived the consequences of civil war. Dr. Al Aris is not going to talk about any injuries, barely any injuries in the book. It's not bullets or bombs that he had to personally, suffer the injuries of, but the emotional and mental and existential bombs and bullets that went through his psyche are very well expressed in the book. We were gonna talk, and we are not going to finish what we want to talk about. So I'm telling you from now, but we will end at the top of the hour, and we will leave it for audiences to discuss this book and to encourage people who have such memories to actually spend their time in this post therapy of a memoir. And I will leave Dr. Tariq Al Aris to talk a little bit more about the book, also about the journey of writing the book, and perhaps picking a passage, selecting a passage for us to read. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Wissam. Thank you for the center, for this gracious invitation, and for your co-hosts. I'm really honored, and this is my second time having this conversation with you about a book that adds something to our understanding of Arabic culture, Arab experience, history, in the hope that these stories can continue and can stay with us longer. And this book, as you know, I work mostly I'm very interested, and I was attracted as a graduate student to travel narratives and to the stories of travelers, Arab travelers going to the West, going to Europe, coming to America, and I did a lot of work on those travelers and what they experienced. What an imam from Egypt, arriving in Paris in 1826, Tahtawi, what he experienced, not only what he thought, but what he experienced, what he felt. And I saw this in their texts, and little by little I understood that I was also talking about, and my research was also mirroring something that I was also experiencing, something my father also experienced living in the US, coming to the US to study in the 50s. And so there is this encounter with the West, there is this narrative, this travel, this location, displacement to escape war, to go for education, to go for a better life in America and Europe and Africa. I mean, all over the world. That is, as you said, part of this experience that that was forced on us in the region, in Lebanon, but also in the region as a whole. And so I've always wanted to um, I understood at some point, and this is, I talk a lot to artists and artists from the region who sometimes invite me to engage and to use the eye, and have actually encouraged me to use the eye to talk about these things, and not just simply use the position of the scholar, who's much more distant from the subject matter. So, and then during the lockdown, during the COVID lockdown 2020, actually, I said, being locked under lockdown, unable to go out, not knowing what's going on, it brought me back to the experience of war in Lebanon as a child. And I felt this is the time to write this book, because this is, it brought back this sense of unknowing what's going to happen, and this is how we lived. I mean, we didn't know if we were going to come back to the house after going out to school, or after going to a very normal lunch, and then all of a sudden things would just erupt in fighting, and you don't know if you're going to make it back to your house. You can't plan. You don't know if you're going to be able to go on a trip or meet people. I mean, everything is really, the time is the time of war. It's the uncertainty of war. And so this whole idea of the future, that is very important, has somehow collapsed completely in that experience. And this is something that I wanted to capture in the book, and also to capture how the human survives something like this. Like, what happens to the human today? We see the images of children dying in Gaza. What about those who also survive? How do they survive that conflict? So, and that's something that I wanted to call attention to, that there are that there are multiple victims and multiple scars that are physical but also emotional, that we carry with us, that we live with. And how do we live with them? And is it possible to heal from them? Is it possible to go back to a time that precede this war that has torn the country apart, that has displaced us, that has uh, caused so much damage at all levels? And this is where, this is the question I come back to in the book throughout, is how did we survive? I mean, the metaphor of the beach, as you beautifully said in the beginning, is going to the beach, because the Beirut I lived in was encircled. I mean, it's a peninsula, and it was encircled, so the only outlet for us was the beach. The only breathing space was the beach. It was blue and green with the algae, and the seaweeds. I mean, this was what was available to us. So how do you invent a reality that allows you to live in a situation like a civil war that lasts for 15 years? And at what expense? What is being repressed? What How do you have to transform yourself? And then when that ends between quotations, because again, seeing the conflicts of the region, they seem to be coming back over and over. But officially, how do you move to something that is post-war? And this was a huge question in Lebanon about reconstruction post-war. What do we do? How do we heal? Can we heal? And so these questions have been fundamental to me. And I, when I came to the US in 1994 as a graduate student, um, I, at some point, I have burnout from graduate school, and I go see a therapist in New York, and she says, I tell her, burnout, graduate school, family relations, I need to talk about that. And she looks at me and she says, well, I thought you're from Lebanon. Don't you want to talk about the war? So the idea is that somehow, these wounds, we carry them without even knowing that we carry them. And somehow they've become so internalized, and they've become so much part of how we interact with the world, not knowing that this interaction has been so much shaped by that particular experience. And this is what I try to explain in the book, and also maybe relate some stories as well about some coping mechanisms, but also some survival kits, offer a survival kit as well, about how do we go through this. And one of the examples I give is my mom and the question of water. And this is uh, again thinking about COVID. I mean, this is the chapter I wrote when COVID happened, and then I applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship. I took a year off, and then I really devoted the whole year just to write the book. And there is this what came out of me that during that at the beginning of the lockdown and in the month of March, to 2020, is this chapter on water, the one sediments, that about my mom collecting water in these bottles. And I can read a little bit of that because I think it's and I will talk a little bit about it. So she collects these bottles, and I always fight with her, why do you have these bottles? I mean, no one drinks from the faucet anymore, but she insists on filling these bottles and eventually drinking from them. So I'm going to read, this is from chapter 3, it's called Sediments. And this is really the chapter that pushed everything, that made me want to write the book. The first thing my mom drinks in the morning is 2 cups of warm water. She warms the water either in a pot on the stove or in a little electric kettle, depending on the availability of electricity that day. She tells everyone that drinking warm water in the morning flushes out all fats and poisons and ensure a vigorous metabolism and a radiant, milky skin. For a woman who was born during World War II and who abhors needles and knives, water holds the secret to her beauty. It accentuates her big blue eyes and earns her compliments wherever she goes. My mom's recipe for healthy living can be traced to a series of books on homeopathic medicine by Sabri Qabbani, a doctor from Damascus who belongs to the Syrian branch of my mom's family. He started a radio show and a magazine in the 50s that advocated healthy eating habits and lifestyles. His work became a Bible for a generation of enlightened Arabs who came of age in the second part of the 20th century. Having survived wars and famines, colonialism and nationalism, this generation would focus on physical health and stress reduction. Unknowingly, perhaps, they were getting ready to confront far greater horrors that lay ahead. Qabbani's book, Your Doctor by Your Side, occupies a special place in my maternal grandfather's library. Entire paragraphs are underlined and copious notes are found in the margin. The book includes detailed advice on nutrition and disease prevention and recommendations on how to avoid depression and bad moods. In the chapter Laugh, Laugh, You Will Heal, Kabbani describes the reaction of the nervous system to sadness and stress, the poisons of the modern age. He explains how adrenaline is secreted and by which gland and to what effect. Ultimately, he advances a radical thesis, and I quote: to preserve mental and physical health, avoid depressing places, never attend funerals, and never, ever read sad stories. End of quote. Of course, I think Kabbani would say, don't read my book because it has sad stories as well. But so, how do you, what is this method of flushing out the poisonous? How do you flush out the poison? How do you reduce stress? I mean, and and what does it have to do with the water bottles that my mom fill from her faucet and then let them sit? And of course, when drinking water in Lebanon, no one really drinks from the water faucet. People buy water now all the time. I mean, during the war, after the war, even till this day. And then when you look at her bottles, you see at the bottom like a brownish sedimentation. and you say, this is terrible that she's drinking from these bottles. But what I eventually realized is that this is the poisonous that Al Qabbani is warning against. That somehow she invented a filtration system where but just by letting the water sit in these bottles, all the sedimentation, all the things that might poison you is going to go down to the bottom, and you leave them there, you don't disturb them, and then you just pour and you drink up till the clear part that has been filtered by the just the simple act of letting it sit in those bottles for days or a week or however time. And this is how my mom dealt with the war. Like, how do you let these things sit? You don't extract them, you don't try to violently take them out, you can't get rid of them, you just have to let them sit. And this is something that, kind of writing this book and thinking about it, about how we survive this, is became very clear to me. And of course, how the way we lived. I mean, as a kid as well, like, I was involved in the water distribution in the building. So I mean, the question of water, which is in the title of the book, is not just simply the beach, but it is also, water as a language of play, as a language of desire, but also waterways as, the places I went through. I lived in Abidjan, in Cote d'Ivoire in '89 during, one of the big wars, one of the final big wars of the civil war in
Your
18.
trip to Cyprus.
Trip to Cyprus, how Cyprus was connected also to Lebanon through water, especially when the airport was closed, but also trip to Cyprus. So this water is really, a body, that connects us, that separates us, that allows us to move, that allows us to play. It is light and it is heavy. It burns. I mean, eventually the book ends with me coming to the US in 1994 and taking showers every day, and hot showers every day, until my skin totally broke, and I had no idea this was happening. So in the end, I say this was a water that was not giving you life. It was, or cleansing you. It was a water that is also destroying the ecosystem of your own body. So this theme of water became really very important, and from sedimentation and filtration as a way of relating to the world, and also elements. It's the foundational elements, the idea of water and fire. And there is another kind of dimension here, which, to come back to Beirut as the space that is really like a peninsula, it goes into the sea. And here there is a very famous song by Abdul Halim. It's called Qari'atul Finjan, or the Soothsayer, and says, your destiny is to be always stuck between water and fire. مقدورك أن تبقى أبدا بين الماء وبين النار. So this is perhaps also our fate, that this is a space that we are fated to occupy. And because we are fated to occupy it, we have to make the best out of that place, out of that fate. Because as if with the repetition of this model that we keep seeing it today, we're still stuck between water and fire. And how do you create meaning in that space? How do you create reality? How do you survive? How do you hold yourself together and preserve the human in all its art and anxieties and pains and happiness and desires? And the other thing, of course, that's very important probably in this context, is the experience of immigration. And what do you do with this water when you leave? And how does it stay with you? Of course, I talked about the showers, but I want to just read maybe one short section from the chapter called the Erie Canal. And of course, the Erie Canal is the canal that connects the Atlantic through New York all the way to the Great Lakes. And when I came in 1994, I came to Rochester, New York, which is, all the way north of New York State. and the Erie Canal, of course, and the cities of the Erie Canal, which witnessed a lot of Lebanese immigrants and immigrants from that region who came and lived in the cities of the canal, in Utica and Rome. And I met a lot of people who came in the 19th century from our part of the world who lived in those cities. So I just want to talk a little bit about leaving Lebanon, this moment of departure, and how do we stay connected as well despite our displacement. And this is from the this is the Erie Canal, this is chapter 11. I was leaving Lebanon for good. I asked the driver to take the long way to the airport along the beachfront so I could encircle the city one last time, so I could imprint my mind with the view of the sea. I wanted to inhale its smell and preserve it within me, that smell which impregnated my entrails on that day in August, would gestate and rise again every summer, tickling my nostrils and connecting me to the place I left behind. I close my eyes and start smelling the algae at low tide, baking in the sun. Green and purple algae wrapped around the rocks like lace and tassel, revealing the holes and crevices where crab and fish seek shelter from the predators of the open sea. The algae and seaweed eggs generate a special kind of pheromone called dictyopterines. These pheromones turned me into a creature of the sea, into a creature of desire, answering their mating call every summer, no matter where I am or whom I'm with. The smell of the sea rises within me, takes hold of my body, and makes me feel as if the water were splashing me again, leaving little white crystals on my skin once the salt dries out. And so here the question is also of memory and how do we remember? And the memory here is not just simply something in your mind, but it is something you feel on your skin. And it's something that it's the crystal, it is the salt. After you swim all day and then you go and you don't shower immediately, I mean, you start seeing these crystals on your skin, like white crystals of the salt. And this is something, and this is a sensation. It's almost like, I mean, that chapter starts really with almost like a hallucination of smelling things that are not present but that they are there, and having experiences on your skin. I mean, I talk about insects, and because my skin was breaking out at the time from all the hot water and the new soap I was using that promises to kill 99% of germs. I mean, again, changing the soap, you have no idea how that affects you. But this is again the experience of displacement, of coming to a new place, and and even the little things, the elements are not the elements that you are used to. Forget about the culture, forget about the language. I mean, of course, these things, but at the very, very basic physical sense, sensorial level, your body is somehow entering a different place that it has to connect with, and it has to adapt to, and while staying connected to the place it left behind. So the book is also kind of a reflection on that. What does it mean to be in you know in the diaspora? What does it mean to leave? What does it mean to be displaced? And what does it mean to remember and to keep home with us? And what is the role of these elements, of these little experiences that are very material and small, and we don't normally think of them? What is their role in also make us who we are and shape our experience and our identities no matter where we go? So I will stop here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you, Doctor. And I have the pleasure and honor to introduce two hosts with us today from the Arab American Center of Culture and Arts, the president of the center, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Ali Ajami, and Professor Wissam Al-Maliji from also University of Michigan, Dearborn. We'll start with you, Dr. Ajami, your reflections and thoughts.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Tarek, and we have a lot of things in common. We are both Lebanese, American in this diaspora. We are both writers. But there's something new I just discovered from the book. We share the same experience living in Abidjan. You have been there in the early 90s. I lived there I was the ambassador of Lebanon and Ivory Coast from 2007 till 2013 for 6 years.
Wow.
So the chapter you wrote about Côte d'Ivoire and your experience in Abidjan in general, it really captivated me. The book in general captivated me, but this specific chapter, it just opened up the gates of my memory. Like this. You reminded me of all the places I've been to. Côte d'Ivoire itself, you know, my own the residence of the ambassador of Lebanon was just behind. And the walls of my residence was behind Côte d'Ivoire.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you reminded me of the plateau. The plateau is where my embassy there.
Yeah.
My offices are in plateau. You remind me of Marcory. You know, Marcory is, we call it the little Beirut in
Yes.
Petit Paris down there. You know, during the civil war that erupted in 2011, Marcory was the safest place.
Yes.
Even myself, I was evacuated from Cocody because it's just nearby the residence of Laurent Gbagbo, not about 500 meters away. And you know, the fight was all in that area. So I was evacuated to Marcory. My brother lives in Marcory. Even the area of Plateau was also devastated by the civil war.
Yeah.
I was obliged also to move the offices from there. I don't know if you have met the late Hajj Nazib Zahar. He was the president of the Lebanese community.
Mhm.
So I opened my offices in his residence in Marcory.
Wow.
And for about a month during the civil war, we were expecting hundreds of Lebanese coming down there. I was obliged. I was doing their passports, their paperwork, because you know we were about to evacuate them. We did a lot of evacuations, thousands of them to Lebanon.
Yeah.
You know that war put me in a very. After reading your book, I remember that now I have been in 2 civil wars.
Yes.
One in Lebanon, and now the second in Ivory Coast. And
Yeah.
you opened my gates. I will write
Yes.
something about how to live a double experience of living in a double civil wars. One in West Africa. And you know, West Africa, you have lived there, it was prosperous. During the civil war, you can't believe it. Imagine, and you will be in your house and you look out from the balcony and you see some people grabbing one, putting kerosene on top of him and just kindle him with fire.
Wow.
Just like this, in front of your own eyes, and you could do nothing about it. Anyhow, Dr. Tariq, you reminded me of all these places, the streets, lakes, beaches, restaurants of that Petit Paris. Till now, they call it Petit Paris because it's the most beautiful city in West Africa. Although you were talking about an earlier experience more than 15 years before I go there, but you managed to inject life into my memory. Although I left Abidjan since 11 years, but thank you for igniting this. And I have a lot of questions later on after we hear what Dr. Miligi would say, and then we will come to the discussions. Thank you, Dr. Tari. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Wissam.
I want to thank you, Dr. Tarek, for writing this book, and this is one of those rarities. It's a fascination of not just a memoir, but a work of literature, and I guess it's not very difficult to write a memoir, but it is very difficult to make that a work of art, and this is what you have done here, in my opinion, and maybe because of my background as a literature sort of professor and also a graphic novelist. I'm very visual, and I see the visuality in your writing as the narrative style. I mean, I teach narratology sometimes, and this is what I would talk about, and I mean, in my questions, I might be referring to those as well. There are three things that I found fascinating in your book, among many other things, but those are the ones I will mention right now. This visual aspect, and then the narrative style, and also humor, which is amazing how you managed to get humor into. I mean, I found myself laughing at moments and embarrassed at myself at laughing, because this is supposed to be there's war going on, but I mean, there's so much that you say over there that is this sense of macabre, in a way, where you bring humor and you bring uh, and you thread that together in one uh, narrative style that is very smooth, like water, perhaps. One of the things that I found fascinating, for instance, is uh, the motif of psychology that you keep repeating again. When you mentioned Freud earlier on, and how Freud has meant a lot to you, but also the brother who says, "This is very dangerous that the son is sleeping next to the mother because of, I mean, Freud. Aren't you? Haven't you read like Freud before?" I mean, I couldn't stop laughing and reading this. Even earlier on, so even in the quotes that you bring in, you're quoting Bruce Lee. I mean, be water, my friend, and the 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 references to Freud, to Jules Verne, for instance, and science fiction to that, how you bring together elements from your own readings, from your own background, and thread those into part of the narrative. I found this fascinating. And this goes on and on. I mean, I don't want to take too much time, but I'd probably need to maybe refer to a couple of those, like the 9/11. I mean, who's this FBI? Just a minute, I'll get dressed. I mean, the the, the combination of like nakedness and the FBI, and with all the background that all of us are aware of. Uh, I mean, whether psychological or like the eeriness of 9/11, and like, no, 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 get dressed before you open to the FBI. So I mean, or maybe not, because I mean they're probably going to strip search a person anyway. So I mean, the whole idea of this mixture of humor and mixture of actually terror, maybe, or even horror, like fear, in so many of the cases, and also the reference to the skincare. Nobody wants to take care of me. No one wants to take me seriously. I mean, I have an issue with my skin. Like, look at me, and I mean, this sense of precariousness, I would say, and it's an undertone or an undercurrent in your narrative, that anything could happen at any moment. Uh,
Yeah.
and this aspect of, it's almost, I don't know if it's dystopian. I know Sam mentioned, like in our, like when he was introducing, like when he was talking about us, ideas of the apocalyptic or the post-apocalyptic. I find an aspect of science fiction almost over there, or like speculative fiction of science fiction.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm influenced by my own background in that sense, but this aspect of speculation, that anything could happen, the fantastical, that this dream world that is happening over there, that anything could happen from Freud. And I think Freud is probably something that you have insidiously put earlier on to make us start thinking about our own, and explaining to us that Freud sort of discovered sort of the unconscious and so on, and then making it like the Oedipal. Uh, so what I'm really interested in over here, and what I found fascinating about the book, and I wrap up with that, is how you have managed to turn a memoir that is very personal uh, into a literary work that does not have to be about a memoir at all, but it can be a narrative, and that combines aspects that you would probably not see in a memoir about war, a memoir about diaspora, a memoir about suffering, a memoir about traveling. You have added aspects of introspection, but have also called upon the reader to introspect in themselves and have used an aspect of humor that I found very rare in those types of memoirs. And yeah, I thank you for that. This has been a fascinating read, and I'll be asking more details about this. But yeah, the narrative and of course the description is very visual in every way. I mean, you're taking us from in the beginning from very deep when you are talking about psychology and then literally to the skin. I mean, from the inside out. And I think the entire book is a journey from the inside out. So it's like even the references to like putting your clothes on as the FBI knocks that I left. So I think it's a journey that is not just lateral, in the sense of growing and like traveling, but it's also internal from the inside out, from the inside of your mind or the inside of the character's mind. I refer to them as characters. I know it's a memoir still, to the skin, literally to the skin. So I'm fascinating with that. I'm looking for sort of more discussion, whether amongst ourselves or people who will be interested in asking. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wissam. Dr. Tarek, do you have any comments before we go into the questions?
I mean, I'm so honored and I'm so moved also that the book was able to speak to you in different ways, to your experiences and to your literary sensitivities, and open up these uh, screens, portals, and I'm so lucky to have you as interlocutors today with whom to talk about this book. So, Wissam.
Thank you, Doctor. There is a passage that you reminded me of while I was reading your book. There's a passage that moved me a lot in Sons and Lovers by Thomas Hardy, where the author, and he is one of the gods of realism, where the author spends 3 pages in his novel describing the sounds, the sounds of the footsteps of the father while the two brothers sleeping in their bed. They're hearing their fathers move downstairs, their drunk father, and they're worried about their father hitting their mother. And he spends 3 pages describing these footsteps. And I see you in your novel. Sometimes you stop for a moment, and I feel like the whole time stops, and everyone freezes, and you want to talk about this thing that happened, like the nanny when she turned around and she slashed your hand, or like moments that you want to stop and you want to let's spend some time here, because this is something that has its metaphorical depth. So, but at the same time, there are some imagination and there's some romanticism. And I wonder, between realism and romanticism, where do you find yourself?
Realism and romanticism, uh, humor and seriousness, Bruce Lee and Ayub or Job, right? I mean, and this is between water and fire, the light and that which gives you life and that which could take it away. And there is a tradition also in Arabic literature called al-hazl wa jad. So it is seriousness and humor. And this is a very long tradition, I think, that we've kind of inherited, that you need this dialectic, you need this dialogue between the heavy and the light, between the funny and the tragic, to and this is where what the space I also inhabit. Because if it's too much in one direction, then something about the balance is off. Something about, again, if we think about the human, and this is something very important for me, like the voice. We don't want someone to speak for us, we also want to speak for ourselves, and that voice has to be real. It's not, if it's too much in one, it is missing that balance. And for me, this is the balance that has been very important for me, and it comes out of me, and I'm attracted to also in my readings, as a reader, as a literary critic, as someone who's, so I'm sensitive to that humor. I see it, but but I also see the layers as well, that it covers. Humor might be an expression of anxiety, like, Dr. Miligi said. I mean, the humor could be, it could be multiple things. It could be, the scene with the brother, at Freud. I mean, it could be a very, you know it's a very, you read it as a very funny scene. Some people might take it a very serious scene if they're kind of, you know Freudians in a strict way, right? So I think this is the kind of things that I think we need to balance, and to say that even in the middle of war we are able to be funny, and this is the survival of the human. And I think I wanted to capture that. I wanted the reader to know that we are silly and funny, and but also suffered, like, hugely, and our perception of reality has been totally distorted by this conflict that lasted for so long, and really kind of affected every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. Before I move to my peers, Doctor, it's just a follow-up question. And thank you, Dr. Miligi, for correction. The Sons and Lovers was by D.H. Lawrence, who is heavily influenced by Thomas Hardy. But Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure, for example, when Jude says that, or he talks about Jude, that there could, if someone has come to recognize the talents of that boy and his grammatical genius, but he says, I quote, but nobody did because nobody does. And which is very symbolic for realism. And Doctor, the follow-up question on that is that there is a huge contrast between Arab American literature and between Arabic drama in the Arab world. The Arab drama always exaggerates on the emotional sense, while you kind of subdue it, or leave a big part of it unspoken, and lotion it with humor. And also the realism is curtailed, and idealism is this language of Arab drama. We're gonna talk more about that, like going on the bigger picture as part of the Arab American literature. But if you can comment on that before we move to
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's the audience, right? I mean, there is an audience that is very interested in the drama, that consumes a certain literature, or visual culture, back there, that I think here it's an experience of displacement, of being here, or trying to think of questions of identity that you can't take for granted anymore. So I mean, I think there is a level of seriousness, but of course we also have Rami Malek, and we have the humor also that comes in many ways. And I think, and on 9/11, and I don't know if I mention it. I think I do mention it in the last chapter. The Axis. What did they call themselves? The Axis of Evil or something? The comedy group, the Arab American. I mean, that was the Arab American response to 9/11 in New York. It was Dean Ubaidallah and Maysoon Zayed, and all these amazing kind of comedians. They also confronted this question of this crisis that the community was going through after 9/11, through the humorous. And I actually wrote an article about that, about how humor becomes a way to break the stereotype, and to kind of make people think, like, what do you think about Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, and so breaking those models or those expectations is extremely important, and finding a language to do so for Arab American authors is extremely important, because your audience is also different than the audience that is over there, that is consuming it within a different context. And so I feel like I mean, I want this to be read by you, by people who are living in Dearborn, who are living in, Arab Americans, but also I wanted this to be read also by people who don't know much about the region, who are not connected to it in the way that we are. So it's also like thinking about the audience is in a different way, or maybe bring people to a conversation that we think is important, or is showing us something about how we experience these horrible tragedies and catastrophes that they only see on television or on TikTok or what have you. So this is part of the issue here. I think that makes these kind of different genres, uh, you know that allow them to speak in certain languages and adopt certain voices or narrative genres.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Ali?
Okay. Dr. Tariq, I want to start by something that Dr. Meligi mentioned about Freud. We meet Freud throughout the memoir, either between the lines or behind the scenes. He looks like a hero, if not the hero of the book. Was he? That's my question.
So I went through psychoanalysis, right? I mean, I work also a lot on psychoanalysis and Freudian theories in my own work. I studied it at school. I also went through it. So throughout my work, there is a conversation with Freud, and not only Freud, but also the tradition that is associated with Freud. Um as a therapeutic model, as a model of interpretation, as a model of thinking about family relations, and so on. But it's not. And I start, I joke at the beginning, the first chapter. I say, I went to see a therapist because I thought, okay, apply Freud and you will heal, right? Like Freud theory is foolproof. He figured it out. He figured human nature like no other. And of course, the whole book is a way to kind of also undo that and say
Yeah.
human nature is more complex or doesn't really fit into one theory, especially the kind of human nature that we have that comes from a place that has been torn and broken and displaced so many times. So what does it mean to apply the Freud, especially the late 19th century models of family relations on the subject, and particularly the subject of war that we come out from? So there is a kind of you know a definite engagement with Freud. I mean, this is something I invested a lot of time and energy and part of my life, engaging with this in many ways. But there is also something beyond that cannot be reduced to that. There's something about, the skin breakdown. There is something about the salt. There is something about elements, about the sensorial that really exceed as well, or that need to also be brought in, and that have to do as well with those particular experiences that Freud could not have thought of, or that is modeled. And so it is about the limits of those, theoretical models that might be very interesting and important, and that what we might take very seriously, but they cannot fully account for who we are and where we come from and what we go through. And this is again, like, I'm a student of Edward Said. This is also pushing against kind of certain models that are applied on, victims of war or people who come from the region, or and so it's always important to push against those theoretical models, bring something, tease it a little bit, add it, mix it up in a way that feels true to us and to who we are.
If I, yeah, can I,
تفضل.
yeah, okay. I'll go back to again humor, but also I want to add something that you mentioned in the conversation and also in your writing about the genre of uh, travelogues, which is huge in Arabic literature and particularly in the turn of the century. You mentioned Rafat Tahtawi, but I'm also interested in other writers who do mix. Who I think you are following in that tradition somehow, including even modern or like early modern and actually even contemporary ones like Muhammad ibn Walhi's
Of course.
Hadith Isa
That's
ibn Hisham,
yeah.
which has this east-west encounter. In addition to the memoir aspect, here also, or one way of reading this book, if we remove the fact that this is in any way personal or in any way a memoir, it can also be a travelogue. It can be also be an east-west encounter of an entire like family, basically. And خير بشارة رحلات الترشقي الحلوجي, something like that. And you have this in this particular sense, I'm very interested in the role of the travelogue in your writing, or
Yeah.
this trope of the travelogue,
Yes.
the travel literature, the East-West encounter that we find over there. Not just a war memoir, but this aspect of the travelogue. Can you talk a little bit about this and how it
Yes.
somehow informs at least part of your writing or of your experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my first book was about that. Was about called Trials of Arab Modernity, because I mean, it was about these travelers who, who were experiencing breakdowns, collapse, allergic reactions. I mean, basically the body was speaking something that the mind could not say. So how do you give voice to that? How could you represent that? And this is the limits also of the some of the theories that I had studied, because those theories were very much focused on language, what is said, ideology, what is represented, what is the power relation. But what about the things that are not said, with the things that are felt, the things that are a breakdown in the text, like Tahtawi. Here he is describing 1826 Paris. Imagine leaving, Egypt, and going and living in Paris for 5 years, never to return, not once, and then dealing with the weather in Paris and dealing with, it's not the Paris also that we know today. It's a very different Paris at the time. So the guy was so here he is describing the weather. I mean, describing, talking about the French Constitution, and all of a sudden he stops and he starts hallucinating about the clouds and he says, I don't see the sun. Where is the sun? And then he starts, as the Egyptians say, yultum, like he's really having this kind of breakdown, and I see it in the book. Like he stops talking about something very serious and all of a sudden he's talking about this. So this is, I'm also a student of that. See, I'm also kind of a reader of that particular experience that has not registered, that has not been acknowledged, because we're only interested in exchange of ideas, or the political relation between East and West. But there is something about the somatic, what I call the somatic, like the sensorial, the little things as well
Sensory
that are,
perception.
yeah,
The
that are,
sensory perception. Yeah.
yeah, but are for me as important as the bigger story that we normally talk about. Because if I'm very interested in this relation between, cultural encounter, I mean, again, diasporic context, I mean, you're always dealing with a different culture, you're in between, right? I mean, hyphenated identities. I mean, there are a lot of questions of encounter, of the not one, of the many, at least the two. So I'm interested in how they come together, and I think you're absolutely right. There is a whole tradition in the Arabic context, that's, I mean, in other also literatures as well, but especially, that deals with this question, and the question of modernity as well. I mean, Muwailihi as well. I mean, the Pasha that comes out and tells him about how things used to be, right? Like, I mean, there is this relation of how do we describe history in those encounters, or how those encounters might allow us to understand ourselves as a people with a particular history and with a particular experience.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, I think this goes back to what Wissam was saying earlier about how the difference between Arabic literature and American literature, in a way,
Yeah.
in the sense of passion and emotion. And when you talk about how history can be narrativized, maybe, or becomes sort of part of a literature, like Mahfouz uh, when he rewrites, and this is something that you do, like
Yeah.
deconstructing the narrative, like he constructs, for instance, Ibn Battuta into Ibn
Yeah.
Fattuma.
Yeah.
So this sense of deconstruction that you have, it makes me think of, I mean, part of my my upbringing was in Morocco, and I remember like watching Hazet Tamburi, sort of so this sense of the the very Arabic traditions that you have, and then your reference to America as a hot tub, like the experience over there, like it was like your hot tub experience. What I'm seeing over here is an Arabization an of American literature in a sense, or you're bringing an aspect of that in the narrative, which is it's not an easy area to play with. I don't want to be asking like two questions in a row, but
Yeah,
maybe you can address sort of how, because this is one thing that I find missing in Arab American literature sometimes.
yeah,
Maybe putting the back into the Arab American literature, like making it Arab and not just Arab American as well, or adding, or like underlining the Arabic aspect of the Arab American literature. And I find that a little bit more pronounced in your writing than many other writings as well. And
yeah.
maybe you can speak to that if you want.
And to add to that, Dr. Wissam, so we can mix my question with yours in one, because my question was going to the same direction. Dr. Laris, his writings from the trials of Arab modernity to the anthology of the Arab Renaissance, and with beautiful translation of certain passages, to leaks, hacks, and scandals, Arab culture in the digital age, to this memoir, Dr. Al-Aris is really pushing Arab American literature in a direction. And I think, and there's a word I used earlier, which is a post therapy. We being in the West and being out of the conflict, at least physically, we have less stress and tension in our retrospective reflections. And can we play a role in writing our Arab thought and memories in a better way?
Yeah. I think I worked a lot on Arab modernity. And the biggest challenge for me as a scholar of Arab modernity in the American Academy or the Western Academy, if you want more generally, is to say, and this is, I go back to Said, is that we have a tradition of modernity. We've been modern for a very, very long time. It didn't start with the internet or satellite television, or it started a long time ago, and we've been engaging with these questions. That's what I try to do with the Arab Renaissance, the anthology of the Nahda, which is really, the debates about women's rights already in the 1880s, debates about this didn't just start. So how do we, this is very important, because the whole idea is that to exclude you from the tradition of modernity, to say the modernity is only a Western process, and you are stuck in some past that is, archaic, unchanging, and you're bound to repeat it as is. And so you're not able to kind of evolve, intervene in any way. And so for me, I think what part of the argument is to say you know, I also will kind of, even if you look at music that comes out of the region, it is hybrid, it's mixed. There is something Arabic, but there is something Western. If you look at the Rahabni, the Fairuz, the Rahbani brothers in Lebanon, they have Mozart, they have Russian composers, they have the Maqama, they have the Andalusi styles. They are really, but it is coming in a very mature way. This is, it, and it is precisely that I think need, I don't know, I'm an admirer of that, and I want to assert that we're kind of comfortable where we are culturally, and we can take and from our tradition, we can take from Europe, from the West, intervene in it, and I think that's a sign of maturity. It's not a sign of fakeness or and authenticity. I don't believe in this dialectic of either authentic or fake. I think, we're we also are sure of ourselves that we can, be claim a certain heritage, a certain Arabic tradition, but also take from the West and take the things that are good for us. And this is, I go back to Gibran, in his مستقبل اللغة العربية, the future of the Arabic language, his text we translated in the anthology, who says, you keep the poisonous out and you take the things that is going to, that's going to nourish you. So we come back to the poison in the bottles of my mom. You let the poison sit. So I feel like I'm, also coming from there. I mean, now you have more and more of a generation writing in English. I mean, I'm also coming, I did my education, you know undergraduate in Lebanon. Then I came here and I'm writing in English, which is not my first language or even second language, I would say. I mean, I'm more of a francophone. I mean, English comes much later, but that's also a development in ways that you now you have more and more authors who are doing this, who are able to kind of speak in this language where there is a recognition of what's happening over there, and a certain maturity to capture it, and an engagement with American popular culture, literary genres, texts, and to bring these two things together in dialogue that is not insecure, that is not struggling, that is also from a position of I don't want to say a position, yeah, it's a comfortable position, where there is no uneasiness, there is no fight. I'm not, I'm also like writing it. I'm a professor at the university, right? Like, I'm also at a point where I'm not just starting with my first first book, right? I mean, it comes after a time of testing and trying to develop also a voice that now I can write something like this and say, this is an experience, and this is how it interfaces with an American experience or reality that has to do with a diasporic existence, but also this is how we bring in the Arabic into it as well.
As we come to the rest of the end of this episode that has been very interesting and thought provoking, we have not dwelled on all the themes of the book. There are many more themes that yet to be
We
discovered
need another hour.
in the book. But we, this is it. It seems, Doctor, from what you were saying, is that you are also concerned, and you have a care, and you are concerned about uh, motivating and delivering a message. So what do you hope that this book would inspire in Arab American youth, or Arab Americans who are thinking to write? And there is now a wave of new Arab American literature, all written in English. It's Arabic thought in an American style of writing. Where do you think we are going, and what do you aspire to inspire?
I mean, I think this is, what you started by saying. Reading the book made you want to write, and Dr. Ali like to write more about the experience in Africa, to write. I mean, and this is what I think. I think books are meant to inspire other people to tell their own stories, or to try to, you know, I mean, and we need these stories, because this is really what will make us, see multiple voices and expand the picture, because we struggle again about questions of representation, especially the Arab American community, so I think the more stories, the more people write, the more genres they incorporate. So I hope that this is, I mean, I already see that, and I'm hopeful that this will continue, and I hope this book adds to this, to this impulse to want to talk and bring things together, things, and to be curious also. I mean, there's the here, there's the there, the in between. Just like Beirut, for me, it's not just there, it's a here as well, and it's and it makes itself palpable in different ways. And so it's important that we listen, that we capture. Again, talking about the footsteps, maybe this requires an attention. So how do we capture that, and how do we bring it onto the page, or film different kinds of artistic expressions as well?
Thank you.
Wissam, I have something. Before we end, I would love to ask something, Dr. Tariq, about the experience in Ivory Coast.
Yes.
You mentioned when you talked about Hotel Ivoire, it was built
Yes.
by an Israeli architect, and
Yes.
it was renovated by Pierre Fakhouri, who is, I have met him down there. He's a Lebanese architect. But
Yeah.
you said, that's what captured me. You said exactly, I will quote, ultimately, Lebanese and Israelis had come to Africa to overcome their kinship rules and take part in a nation building and rebuilding project. What they built, exactly, you said, what they built brought about modernity and liberation. Dr. Tariq, this is very suggestive.
Yeah.
What kinship ties that might should be overcome, and what kind of cooperation between Lebanese and Israelis to bring modernity and liberation, and to whom?
Yeah. I mean, I play on the idea of kinship with my mom, like, and the kinship rules. So basically, like, the kind of the religious separations, the idea that you're this and you're that, which is also the Lebanese civil war kind of models, where the sectarianism in some way. So in a way, sometimes when you take people out and extract these kind of sectarian and nationalistic and ideological division, and say, I have a right to this because of my religion, right? Like certain ideologies pretend to have certain rights to the land because of religion or histories. How do you, once you take it out, what does these diasporic experiences do, and how? But of course, the liberation, I mean, there's something tongue-in-cheek about this, because of course I'm talking about the war of liberation, right? Harb al-Tahrir. And I say, so I'm kind of playing on all these different levels to say that, there is something, an amazing coincidence that I didn't know as a kid, but I had to research it. When I researched Hotel Ivoire, I discovered that it had this amazing history, and that Houphouët Boigny actually went to Liberia first and saw this other hotel, and he said, who's the architect of that hotel? It's not like he went to an Israeli architect because he wanted an Israel. He just liked this other hotel in Liberia. And he said, I want this hotel and something even better. And I say, it's like the genie, the genie in the lamp in Aladdin that produces something. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, how do we, again, critique these kinship structures that forces certain ideologies that are destroying the region, basically.
Thank you.
We have a lot of questions, but at the time, as Wissam mentioned, we are over. So maybe we can do another session,
With
just
great
discuss.
pleasure. With great pleasure.
We
Anytime.
hope, Doctor, since you're in Boston, we hope hopefully one day we will host you in person in Detroit
Anytime.
and
Anytime.
Dearborn, which the Arab American Center for Culture and Arts is seeks to make Dearborn a capital for Arab American literature and arts. Dr. Wissam Maligi, final thoughts?
Yes, I mean, since you mentioned sort of hosting, I mean, this definitely is something I would love to do and we can actually combine sort of the University of Michigan Dearborn and also our center. So basically, like the two centers in a sense. One very quick, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I'm very curious or interested in the role of the father in your novel, and maybe this francophone and anglophone aspect, because he rejects the idea of citizenship and of American citizenship, being sort of a French educated sort of person, and also again the humor comes in when he actually is taken as a hostage. He laughs with the people who were his captors. They laugh with him. They let him go. So this sense of fantastical, almost sort of unbelievable kind of humor over there that takes us to another level. Can you very, very quickly comment on that, and then I promise I won't ask any more questions.
Yeah, I mean, my dad died. I was a teenager, so I didn't really. So I had to reconstruct him,
Yes,
and
you
the
do
way
that a lot.
And the way I reconstructed my dad was through the little stories and the jokes and the little things that I remember of him. So, and this is how I had to construct him as a persona, like as a character also in this book. And what I, and this is how I got to know him more, through by reconstructing him in this way. And these things were actually true. I mean, I remember the day he came back because he wanted to fill his car with gas from the other part of town. and he and he told us the story. And of course, for a kid, like, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure maybe something happened, maybe this particular incident, not this particular incident. But again, this idea of storytelling is a way you reconnect with people that are not, you know that you have bits and pieces of them, and how do you construct and connect with them through writing, when you could not connect with them in person because you lost them at a very early age, or in some cases you did not know them that much. You can reconnect, reconstitute them through letters, through other kind of archives. So for me, these little anecdotes are a way to bring back my father, and in all his humanity, and
Yeah. Just to add one thing, Dr. Tare,
yes,
about what you said now, it's nostalgia.
yes,
Always that drives us, ignites our desire to write, to think, to love. And at the same time, you and all of us, we are always on
yeah,
the search for our lost identity
yeah,
or our fragmented identity. We
yes,
are really fragmented to the bones. We
yeah,
don't know what identity do we have? Arabs, Americans, whatever.
yeah.
So that's it, doctor. Thank you very much for being with
Thank
us.
you,
Thank
thank
you.
you, thank you.
Yeah.
Doctor, maybe I would want to end on a positive note by asking you one last small question. Uh, I always I seek to do an interview, a narrative with my aunt who lived in Bint Jbeil, and she lived through so many wars, and we always delay, like after the Gaza situation.
Yeah,
Is too painful to speak about these memories while they're being
yeah.
recreated. So I always delay and reschedule and reschedule. Has it? I know it's a very painful process, what you've done. Has it been therapeutic? Do you feel better now? Is it a therapy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a second therapy, because in a way, by writing this book, I went back on the couch. But definitely, and also it allowed me to revisit what it means to be in therapy, and what are the things that truly heal us, or the things that we probably can't heal from, and we have to accept and live with, like the bullet in Ahmad's head that I start with.
Mm.
So I think it's a reflection also on that. But definitely it was a very painful process. And but I tried to also filter, just like my mom did, some of the poisonous, and then give you something to drink that is healthy and that will nourish you, uh, as it nourished me. So, but it was all worth it at the end, I feel. And having your comments and questions and engagements, I feel, I'm very happy, and it makes it all worth it. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for engaging.
Thank you, Professor Tarek Al Aris, Dartmouth College, Dr. Wissam Maligi, the director for the Center for Arab American Studies at University of Michigan, Dearborn, Ambassador Dr. Ali Ajami, and Dr. Wujdan Al Sayegh, who has also been watching and participating, Dr. Abbas Youssef. Thank you all, and for all of you who have been watching the program, and to see you again in upcoming episodes. Next Saturday, we have another episode in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict with Dr. Stockton, and about his recent visit to Jerusalem and his reflections from it. Dr. Al Aris, you may have safe travels, and we'll see you again, hopefully, in Dearborn. And good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Thank
Thank you.
Good night. Salam.